In this video, we're going through some of the biggest HSA mistakes that I see way too many people making, which could end up costing them thousands of dollars. At the time of recording this video, my other HSA videos have accumulated thousands and thousands of comments, and I've worked one-on-one with hundreds of people on their health savings accounts. Based on that data, I have a pretty good idea of the mistakes that you need to look out for. Throughout the video, I'll also share some of my pro tips on how to maximize and supercharge a health savings account so that you're able to squeeze out every single ounce of benefit from this account. If you need a primer on the basics of an HSA, then go watch this other video of mine, which is linked at the top right of your screen and down in the description below. Then come back to watch this one, or finish this one, then go watch that one after. Some of you might be new to my method of supercharging an HSA, so let me catch you up on what it means. That way you're not confused when I refer to a supercharged HSA throughout this video. It's basically where you contribute to an HSA, and as medical expenses come up, you pay for them out of pocket instead of using the money sitting in your health savings account. You'll eventually reimburse yourself from the HSA for these out-of-pocket expenses at some point in the future, but the main goal is to keep as much money as possible in the account for as long as possible. The idea behind this is that leaving money in the account untouched allows you to invest it and keep it invested for long periods of time. So you can kind of think of it as a health investment account or a health retirement account instead of a health savings account. Here's what I mean. A simple example would be maxing out the account next year with $4,300. If you leave that money in the account invested for 25 years, then at an 8% average annual return, it'll be worth a little over $29,000. Put another way, by allowing $4,300 to stay invested, you actually gave your future self the ability to pay for an additional $24,700 of medical expenses in the future. I've heard some people make the mistake of thinking it's smart to use HSA reimbursement money for the sole purpose of funding their Roth IRA, but it's not. This is actually a behavioral bias called mental accounting. Here's why. Money in both an HSA and Roth IRA buckets grow tax-free. You can also withdraw money tax-free from both accounts. When you use HSA reimbursement money to fund your Roth IRA contributions, you're effectively limiting the overall amount held in your tax-free buckets. Let me visualize an example so it makes more sense. For 2025, both the HSA and Roth IRA have annual contribution limits of $4,300 if you're single and $7,000 if you're below age 50. So combined, you have the ability to put in $11,300 into two accounts that can grow and be withdrawn tax-free. If you max out your HSA contributions, then reimburse yourself for that amount and use it to contribute to your Roth IRA, then you've actually reduced the amount you're able to contribute to these tax-free accounts for the year from $11,300 down to $7,000, shrinking your total contributions by $4,300. If you want to fund your Roth IRA, then try to do it with new money, but don't go out of your way to reimburse yourself with HSA money just so that you can fund your Roth IRA for the year. Mental accounting can blind people to the opportunity cost of this type of decision, so fight the urge to want to do this sort of thing since mathematically it doesn't really make any sense. Many people miss a critical step with the supercharged method after contributing to their HSA, and that's investing the money. Shout out to the Employee Benefit Research Institute because they were nice enough to send me their most recent HSA report where they found that 87% of accounts had $0 invested in their HSA, which means only 13% of accounts were investing at least a little bit of money. While contributing is great, leaving the funds in cash by accident means you're missing out on tax-free growth that makes HSAs so powerful. If someone had $4,500 sitting in cash within an HSA for just last year when the market saw returns of around 24%, then that's about $1,000 lost to this decision. Compound that $1,000 missed opportunity for 30 years at a 7% average annual return, and that person misses out on about $7,600 of tax-free growth. Holding too much cash in the account for multiple years and missing out on those returns could turn into tens of thousands of dollars of missed opportunity. Now, if you're someone who doesn't want to invest any money, then no worries, I completely understand. But if you do, then please double check your account to make sure that money is being invested and turn on auto invest so you don't run into this potential problem in the future. For those of you who don't feel comfortable investing all of your HSA money like myself and the other weirdos out there, I may have a solution for you. A few years ago, I had some viewers tell me about how they got over this concern. They either kept a little bit in cash or enough to cover their insurance deductible, then invested the rest. I thought that was a really good idea because you kind of get the best of both worlds. Some of your money is protected and there when you need it, while the rest is invested and growing for you. Helps a lot of people sleep better at night. With the invested money in your HSA, you might want to consider exposing it to a 100% stock-based index fund or ETF equivalent instead of putting a portion of it into bonds. As with an account like a Roth IRA, since money in an HSA grows and can be withdrawn tax-free, technically you want the account to get as big as possible. Because of that, limiting its growth potential by putting it into something other than a 100% stock fund might not make sense. I need to put my Uncle Jarrad responsible hat on for a second. Only do this if you have a higher risk tolerance and can handle the up and down swings that come with this type of index fund. Please do not risk any more than you can personally handle. I'm pretty open about the fact that all HSA providers are complete trash except for Fidelity. All of the other HSA providers require you to hold a minimum amount of cash in your account. If Fidelity HSA doesn't. All other HSA providers charge you unnecessary fees. With a Fidelity HSA, you won't pay any fees other than what the fund you invest in charges you, which is common everywhere. A mistake I see regularly is people continuing to use those terrible HSA providers when they don't have to. Because of that, once you leave your current employer who uses one of these other trash HSA providers, transfer the whole account to a Fidelity HSA. Now, there might be a cost to transferring your whole balance out of that account, but the price that you pay is usually pretty small and offset by the fee savings that you see by moving to a Fidelity HSA. To be specific, don't transfer it to a Fidelity Go HSA because they'll eventually charge you a fee since it is a managed account. You'll want to choose the plain Jane Fidelity HSA where they won't charge you any sort of fee. If your employer uses one of these other providers and you want to minimize the amount of HSA money exposed to their fees, then technically you can do partial balance transfers from your employer's HSA to a Fidelity HSA. This is something I used to do to avoid fees when my previous employer used health equity. Every so often, I would transfer everything above the health equity account cash minimum to my Fidelity HSA. Heads up that it can be a bit of an annoying process because you'll have to fill out paperwork every single time you transfer money out of the account. But I personally found a way to sort of automate the whole process, which saved me a lot of time. Don't make the mistake I did where you try to do a full balance transfer while you still work for your current employer, because then the HSA provider might try to close your account. If they close your account, then your employer won't have anywhere to contribute HSA money from your paycheck, which isn't a good thing. This almost happened to me back when I was with my previous employer. Health Equity was like, we're going to close your account if you move all of the money out. So make sure that you double check what the minimum is that you need to keep in the account before transferring any money into a Fidelity HSA while you work at your current employer. Help support my little dog Molly as well as this channel by hitting that thumbs up button and sharing the video with someone that you think needs to see it. I came across an interesting trend about what happens when your employer contributes money to your HSA as a bonus. This report found that when an employer contributes money to an HSA, the employee reduces the amount that they contribute. As you can see, when an employer didn't contribute a bonus amount to their employee's HSA, the average amount contributed was $2,500. When an employer did contribute a bonus amount, in this example $900 worth, the average contribution by the employee dropped to $1,900 for the year. From a behavioral perspective, this makes a lot of sense. If we see that our employer is going to contribute $900 for us, then in our minds, we almost feel like it's okay to reduce our contribution, because technically, if they're going to contribute $900 for you, then their $900 plus your $1,900 contribution brings you to a total of $2,800 for the year. Much more than you would have contributed without them. But if you had continued contributing $2,500 regardless of what your employer contributed for you, then the total contribution for that year would be at $3,400, which with the supercharged method would grow into a lot more money. I want to try to encourage you not to reduce the amount that you are going to contribute based on any sort of HSA bonus that your employer gives you, unless of course it's going to put you over the contribution limit for that year. Now, if you honestly can't afford it, then I completely understand. But if you can afford it, even if it feels a little uncomfortable, more is always better. Along the same lines as employer contributions, the Employee Benefits Research Institute also found that higher HSA contributions were associated with lower 401k contributions. Again, I'm not blind to the fact that not everyone has loads and loads of extra money lying around, so the amount they can allocate to different accounts may be limited. But I just want to point out these trends, that way you can hopefully get ahead of this behavioral issue that may negatively impact how much you're contributing to all of your other retirement accounts. Not tracking your medical expenses over the years by keeping copies of your receipts is going to be a big mistake that you're going to want to avoid. Like I always say, think of these things like $100 bills, because you cannot reimburse yourself for past medical expenses if you don't have the receipts to show proof that you spent the money on legit medical costs. This is especially important for those of us who don't plan on cashing in on our current medical expenses for another 20 or 30 plus years so our money can stay invested. Having a paper trail is extremely important. All it takes is for the IRS to audit you one time, see that you withdrew money out of your HSA, then ask for the receipt to show proof. If you don't have this proof, then have fun with the penalty that they are going to impose on you. I always tell the story about a guy I know who spent his HSA money on some candy when he paid for his prescriptions when he went to somewhere like Walgreens or CVS. His big brain figured, they won't notice a few extra dollars on the bill for a couple of Snickers bars, but guess what? He got caught. Here's my foolproof receipt tracking process to make things easier that you can use if you want. First, create 2 folders on a cloud-based storage platform like Google Drive. Name the first to be paid out and the second paid out. Every time you pay for something out of pocket, you'll either take a picture of it with your phone or use an app to scan a copy, then place it in the to be paid out folder. Rename the file with the dollar amount first, followed by the date listed on the receipt. The thought process behind this is that in 30 years, you're most likely going to want to withdraw a particular amount. This will make it so much easier to filter from lowest to highest to batch a couple of receipts together that total up to that amount. Then once you, for lack of a better term, cash in on those receipts, you move them to the paid out folder so that you don't accidentally try to withdraw the same expense twice. You don't have to do this, but I also created an HSA expense tracker where I have a line item that matches up with each receipt that I put into the folder. This way, at any given point in time, I know the maximum amount of money I can withdraw from my HSA for past expenses I've paid out of pocket. For me, that equates to about $6,600 that I can pull from my HSA right now. Even though I don't plan on taking any of that money out for another 20 plus years, I know that if something happens where I get into a really bad financial bind, then that money is sitting there if I need it. If up until this point I hadn't been keeping track of those receipts in the past, then this wouldn't be an option. This applies just as much to even the smallest medical expenses. Items like Band-Aids, Advil, contact solution, or syringes may only cost $15 or less individually. But over time, those little costs can really add up and grow into a large amount of money. A lot of people are skeptical about whether or not the IRS is actually going to allow you to cash in on those receipts in 20 plus years. Now, as someone who generally mistrusts the government, I completely understand where your skepticism is coming from. So here's a snapshot of the IRS addressing this exact topic 20 years ago in the Internal Revenue Bulletin 2004-33. And they even give an example. But notice this one important condition. He or she must keep records sufficient to later show that the distributions were exclusively to pay or reimburse qualified medical expenses and that the qualified medical expenses have not been previously paid or reimbursed from another source. That right there is why I stress using the receipt tracking process that I showed you a few minutes ago. I don't want you to be the person who thinks that they're doing everything right, but gets screwed over because you didn't track things properly. You can create your own HSA tracking spreadsheet, or you can get a free copy of mine down in the description below. For those of you who are creating a supercharged HSA and paying for everything out of pocket, consider using a solid rewards credit card to get an added bonus. I rarely fly since my dog Molly travels with me everywhere. That's why I personally like the 2% cashback Fidelity card over something like a travel rewards card. I not only like this card because of the 2% cash back, but they actually allow me to transfer my cash rewards straight into a brokerage account where I just invest the money instead of spend it. Up until recently, an HSA has mainly been seen as a tool to cover reactive health-related expenses, so after problems arise. Think doctor's visits, medications, surgeries, and things like that. But now, people and companies are finding ways to unlock the potential of an HSA to also support proactive health-related expenses. So think of more preventative things, like gym memberships, nutrition counseling, supplements, and preventative screenings. For example, I recently bought the new Oura Ring 4 as a proactive health-related expense since I checked, and it is HSA approved for me. Last year, I talked to one of the co-founders of a company called TrueMed that helps people like us spend our HSA money on products and services focused on preventing or reducing future medical conditions. Since using HSA funds for preventative medicine is still a bit of a gray area, TrueMed has you fill out a questionnaire. This is reviewed by a medical practitioner who approves each purchase to make sure that it complies with IRS rules for HSA eligibility. No, this is not sponsored, and I don't earn anything from promoting TrueMed. Taking proactive steps for my health has been a main priority for me over the past 15 years, so I'm just a big fan of what they're doing. A common question I see is if you can use HSA money on medical expenses outside of the US. The simple answer is yes, you can. The only rule is that any expense must be a valid qualifying medical expense in the US, must be legal in both countries, and must be covered under your plan. So you can't leave the country to go do ayahuasca like I did and pay for it with HSA money, even though that does have health benefits. You also cannot order prescription drugs from another country and then have it shipped to you here in the US. You can, on the other hand, pay for medication or services that you consume while outside of the US. For example, if you're injured while traveling and go to the doctor. If you do this, then I would personally suggest paying for these medical expenses out of pocket through something like a good rewards credit card that we just talked about, instead of paying for it directly with something like an HSA debit card. The reason is because a lot of HSA providers will charge you a percentage-based fee when you use your HSA debit card outside of the country. I think it was Health Equity who said that they charge you a fee of between, I believe it was 1% and 3%, which to me is pretty darn insane. Another common mistake I see is around when you incur a medical expense and when you can withdraw that money from your HSA. You can only use your HSA money on medical expenses you incur after you open your first account. So if you get your first HSA and start contributing to it in the year, we'll say 2025, then you can only withdraw money from the account for medical expenses that you have after that point in time. You cannot withdraw money for medical expenses anytime before 2025 because you hadn't established your first HSA. Along the same lines of this one, you don't have to be actively contributing to an HSA to take withdrawals from the account as long as the initial account was open before you incurred the approved medical expense. So if you only enroll in a high deductible health plan and contribute to an HSA in say 2025, then switch away from an HDHP for the rest of your life starting in 2026, then you can still withdraw money from the account at any point in time. Easy way to remember this is that you have to be enrolled in an HDHP to be able to contribute to an HSA, but you don't have to be actively enrolled in an HDHP to withdraw money from the account. A very common question I get is what happens to an HSA after you pass away? What happens to all those tax benefits? Do you still get the triple tax savings or what? Well, Let's dive into it. If your spouse takes over the account and you both have accumulated medical expenses over the years and you've saved all those receipts, then the surviving partner can still cash in on those receipts to get reimbursement from all of those past expenses with no problem. Once the money in an HSA goes to someone other than the original owner or their spouse, then the account can no longer be treated as an HSA in the traditional sense, which means all of the tax benefits go away for the non-spouse beneficiaries. So if the original owners had paid out of pocket for and saved, say, $20,000 in medical receipts from the past 20 years, but never reimbursed themselves from the HSA tax-free, non-spouse beneficiaries would not be able to reimburse themselves for those receipts tax-free. The HSA money would be taxed as ordinary income in that year for the beneficiaries. But if the last surviving spouse accumulated medical bills that had not been paid for yet, then those bills would be reimbursed from the HSA tax-free. If this is the case, then the beneficiaries need to take out the tax-free reimbursement money within 12 months. Let's create a scenario so you can hopefully understand a little bit better. Simple example would be that you and I are siblings and our parents have an HSA worth, say, $100,000. Now, dad passes away, so mom continues to get the same tax-free benefits from the HSA since she is the surviving spouse. Then, a few years later, mom gets sick and has to go into the hospital. She's in there for, we'll say, 2 months, then passes away. During those 2 months in the hospital, she accumulates $40,000 in medical expenses that had not been paid for, either from the HSA or out of a bank account. Us being her children and the beneficiaries, we have 12 months to withdraw that $40,000 from her HSA tax-free, as long as those medical bills that she accumulated during those last 2 months in the hospital had not been paid for yet. So the remaining $60,000 in her HSA is then distributed to us by the custodian as soon as possible, then would be taxed as ordinary income. If you want to know the 4 best ETFs to invest in with your HSA, then watch this video to your left next. Hit that like button before you go. I'll see you in the next one, friends. Done.